Okay, so I'm gonna begin now. Hi guys, my name is Lucy Troy. I'm a high school junior and I'm calling in from New York City. And it's great to be with you all today. Today I'm gonna speak to you guys a little bit about renewable energy and Youth Climate Action Team's Clean America Project. So just to preface, Youth Climate Action Team is a youth climate international nonprofit, and I am their global affairs co-director. So this doesn't necessarily fall under global affairs, but it's certainly one of our initiatives. So just to give some background, let's first talk about just simply what energy is. And I'm sure you all think of energy in a lot of different ways, and that is because it has a lot of different uses. There are a lot of different types of energy. So there's thermal, there's chemical, nuclear, electrical, radiant, so on and so forth. And some of it is man-made, like electricity that we use in our homes, and some of it is natural, like chemical energy that's stored in natural gases. And the reason why energy is so important to every industry is because production relies on energy. So think of a factory. If you want to produce a product or have a machine run, you're going to need energy to keep those operations happening. And we use a lot of energy. We have a world average consumption of primary energy of about 58 kilowatts per hour per day per person. And that's a mouthful, but this number is already pretty high, and it's even higher in more developed economies where people are just buying more and more and relying on even more energy. So this is just America, for example, but here you can see the average American's annual energy consumption. So a big bulk of this is taken up by automobile gas that is used to power cars, and it's also used to power trains. Gas is used to power trains, airplanes. Obviously, all vehicles require fuel. Another big chunk is taken up by electricity that we use in our homes to turn on lights, keep water running. Then there's also natural gas and things like water heating and air conditioning. So because energy is required for production and manufacturing, companies rely on energy that's really cheap and efficient. So with economic growth as their main focus, they haven't really been concerned about the environmental impacts of these energies. So a vast majority of our energy is non-renewable. And non-renewable energy means that its sources don't replenish. So they don't naturally reproduce. They have to be done, that has to be replenished manually, or it's diminishing. And so some common forms of non-renewable energy are things like natural gas, coal, and oil, which are used for things like heating, generating electricity, and propelling vehicles, which we spoke a little bit about in the previous slide. So here's the issue. Climate change, as a lot of you probably know, is caused by the emission of greenhouse gases that offset a greenhouse effect and warm our planet. And the most important source of these greenhouse gases is the burning of fossil fuels for electricity generation, heating, and transport. So with fossil fuels generating most of our energy, we're emitting large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere each year. So currently, non-renewable energy functions on and relies on fossil fuels, and fossil fuel emissions cause climate change. So what do we do? What are our alternatives? To protect our environment and to fight against climate change, we need to really drastically reduce our usage of non-renewable energy. So we need to try to cut that out to the best of our abilities. So whenever you hear about governments cutting emissions, they're likely talking about switching to energy forms that don't emit greenhouse gases at threatening rates. So in turn, they're switching to renewables. What renewable energy is, it's essentially the opposite of non-renewable energy. So it comes from energy, it's energy that comes from resources that are naturally replenishing so that they never run out. And this makes it super efficient because we rely on so much energy. So it's great to have energy that comes from a resource that replenishes itself. Another thing is that these resources are virtually inexhaustible in duration, but they're limited in the amount of energy that is available per unit of time. So basically, they're not as high in energy as non-renewable energy. However, they are the fastest growing source of energy in the world. So renewable energy can combat climate change since it creates no direct greenhouse gas emissions. And the only resulting emissions are indirect emissions, which come from manufacturing parts, installation, operation, or maintenance. But even these emissions are really, really minimal. And renewable energy can also decrease pollution. So many of these popular forms of renewable energy actually create no air pollution whatsoever. And once they're built, renewable facilities cost very little to operate, and the fuel is often free. So there's a lot of upsides to using renewable energy. So all of that sounds really great, but of course there are some downsides. So first, it is difficult for renewable energy sources, as we spoke about before, to generate power on the same large scale as fossil fuels. And this is a huge, huge downside for companies that rely on really fast and efficient production or non-renewable sources for their products, like ExxonMobil, for example. So they're not as inclined to use non-renewable energy. And another thing is that renewable energy facilities definitely take up more space. So if you think about it, if we wanted to use wind-powered energy, we would have to set up a lot of wind turbines, and that takes up a lot of land. If you think about a wind farm, if you've been driving, somewhere rural and you've seen a bunch of wind turbines, it takes up a lot of land. So in turn, this can disrupt wildlife living in those areas and migration matters, and this results in ecological destruction, which seems a little counterintuitive considering we want to use renewable energy to better our environment, not create more destruction. And a third issue is that solar and wind energy are intermittent. So this means that they only generate power while the sun is shining or while the wind is blowing. So batteries can store extra energy for later use, but they're often pretty costly. But the good thing is solar and wind energy are not the only forms of renewable energy, non-renewable energy. Are not the only forms of renewable energy, sorry. So there are a couple, there's geothermal energy. So there's quite a few others. And despite these downsides, we cannot continue to use non-renewable energy at our current rates if we want to stop or slow down climate change. So yes, we will have to make some sacrifices in our switch to renewable energy, but it's certainly, to our knowledge so far, the only way to stop climate change. So with so much at stake for a lot of different parties, for us, who are trying to grow up in a clean environment, and for companies who are just trying to keep their finances high, there's a lot of misinformation surrounding renewable energy. So first, we have to realize that we're actually in the middle of the third industrial revolution. So this might sound a little surprising, but according to economists, industrial revolutions require three things: a new way of communicating, a new transportation mechanism, and a new power source. So our current industrial revolution contains all three: the internet as our new way of communicating, hybrid and electrical vehicles as our new transportation mechanism, and the new power sources are solar, wind, and nuclear. So not renewable energy. But since 2016, all the top 5 oil companies, some of which you can see on this screen, have spent over $1 billion trying to confuse people about these new power sources. And this has been really, really profitable for them, considering they've made $900 billion, over that, in fact, in profit in the last 10 years. So in 2019, they only spent 3% of their huge capital investment in low carbon alternatives. So in turn, they've suggested that renewable energy is not feasible. So just to sum it up, they have a ton of money, and they keep making money by using non-renewable energy. And they're trying to make it seem like renewable energy isn't an efficient alternative when in fact it really is. So this is all a lie. And we can point to November 2018 as proof of this lie. So there was a massive shift in November 2018. Renewable energy became cheaper and more efficient than fossil fuels. So this was 3 years ago, and yet we're only just now beginning to have serious conversations about renewables. So how did we realize that renewables were more efficient? So let's take solar panels, for example. The sun emits 470 exajoules of energy to the earth every 88 minutes. And that's about the same amount of energy that all of us combined use in just 1 year. So 88 minutes powers 1 year. And this could power our global economy multiple times over. So this proves that renewable energy is not bad for the economy, since the sources are inexhaustible. Another myth that has been spewed by big oil companies is that we'll never be able to produce an energy grid powered by renewable energy sources. So right now our energy grid is powered by fossil fuels, but we need to change that. And we could actually build a smart grid that takes inspiration from the connectivity of the internet. And this is something that hasn't been built just yet, but it's definitely technology in the works. So for example, wind farms that use smart technology make sure that each wind turbine is communicating with each other. So they suggest how each individual turbine is affecting the wind and how the group can act more efficiently. So if we imagine this on a bigger scale with entire power grids communicating with each other, this totally increases efficiency. So finally, something fossil fuel reliant companies don't want you to know is that we can pay for renewables. We absolutely can. We could take America as an example. If a 70% tax were imposed on the wealthiest Americans, it would bring in about $72 to $170 billion each year that could be invested into renewable energy. And just for reference, this tax would only be on the money that people make that is over $10 million, which I think is a pretty large sum of money by just about anyone's standards. And this wouldn't necessarily slow down the economy, which is something to talk about another time because it's a big debate that's been had, but it's been proven to not slow down the economy if we tax the wealthiest of the wealthy. And if you think about it, companies like Amazon paid absolutely zero federal income tax in 2018. So if we just had a fraction of their sales, renewable energy could thrive. And this is where the government comes in. So implementing renewable energy relies on people in positions of power, namely government officials and policymakers. Therefore, it's crucial to put pressure on our elected officials to fund renewable energy, whether that's through taxes or allocating special funding, to encourage the divestment from fossil fuels and to support companies and businesses that use renewables. And our governments should want to be involved because the renewable energy industry can create hundreds of new, well-paying green jobs, so long as we have the necessary policy backing them up. So these people who are supposed to be representing you in government have a lot of power to change policy, fund renewable energy products, and divest from fossil fuels. And this is where Youth Climate Action Team comes in. So just to reiterate, Youth Climate Action Team is a global climate nonprofit, and our main focus is on bridging the gap between climate and non-climate groups to consolidate efforts against climate change. So Youth Climate Action Team volunteers, a part of our operations team, have been working on the Clean America Project for about a couple months now. And the Clean America Project is the world's first global teen-led energy study based on Harvard research that found a statistical relationship between air pollution and mortality. So this research had found that air pollution that is offset by non-renewable energy causes mortality and poorer health. And so the goal of our project is for our researchers to calculate the health implications of renewable energies in every US city to develop data-driven energy policy recommendations that can then be relayed to policymakers and government officials. So far, we've completed our preliminary research and calculations, and we've recorded data for over 150 US cities and the impacts of a renewable energy matrix on human lives. Finally, our volunteers get service hours through completing research to fulfill any sort of service requirements. And this is the way that our entire organization operates. All of our volunteers receive service hours for their projects and their help, and we are able to sign off on that since we are a registered nonprofit. So this picture is an example of some of our preliminary research that has been done to quantify the health effects of a solar farm, a solar energy farm, a wind energy farm, and a nuclear energy farm with varying farm capacities. So testing what this would look like for a bigger farm, a smaller farm, and maybe a medium-sized farm. And I've blocked out the names for privacy purposes, but you can see that there's a pretty hefty amount of research, but it actually doesn't take too much time or labor for each of our researchers to do just one calculation, like each person does one row. And we've been pretty efficient with the number of volunteers we've had. Oh, okay. So you guys can all actually get involved in this research. Anyone can join. There's no experience needed. it's completely feasible. Our great Clean America Project directors give really clear instructions. So here are the two ways that you can get information and get involved. You can go to Youth Climate Inc. on Instagram. Make sure to follow us. You can click the link in our bio, and then you can fill out the core team volunteer form and select operations team. So once you're a part of our operations team, which they're our team that works mainly on initiatives and different sort of ideas, you can then start to work on the Clean America Project. We're always looking for more researchers and people to help out. Or you can, if you don't have Instagram or social media, you can go to our website, which is ycatinc.com. You can hover over Get Involved, click on Core Teams, and click Join Now. And then you'll just fill out the volunteer form and select operations. So I know we're a couple minutes ahead, but that is basically it. I could take a couple questions if anyone wants.
That was really great. Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? It's like really interesting. Like, I think it's really upsetting how large corporations are able to like put off like lies